What if the world we know is only the second draft of history? Imagine a time when cities stood on coastlines now buried 100 meters beneath the waves, when monuments rose so precise they could have been carved by machines, when the sky itself was charted with an intimacy that rivals our telescopes. Then, in a single moment, fire from the heavens, ice breaking, oceans rushing in, it was all erased. Not just people, but memory. Not just memory, but an entire world. What if the Great Flood was not merely a myth told around firesides, but the first great reset of civilization, the dividing line between a forgotten age and the history we've been taught to accept? Settle in, let the noise of the day fade, and join me as we walk into the silence left behind. Tonight, we'll drift through myths and megaliths, across drowned continents and broken skies, searching for the traces of a world that ended so ours could begin. Night falls over a world half remembered. Imagine standing at the edge of a river swollen with rain, the banks dissolving into torrents that claw at the soil. The sound is not simply of water, but of time itself collapsing, layers of memory swept away in a single deluge. Every culture carries such an echo. In Mesopotamia, a man named Utnapishtim builds a vessel to endure the wrath of the gods. In India, Manu is warned by a fish god to preserve life before the waters rise. Among the Maya, the gods drown a creation that had strayed from its purpose, then fashion a new humanity from maize. The same pattern appears again and again: destruction through flood, survival through one chosen figure, and the rebirth of the world. What if these stories are not allegory, but memory? What if they describe an event so overwhelming it became humanity's shared genesis, a universal marker between the time before and the time after? Scholars of comparative mythology note that more than 200 distinct cultures tell of a flood that covered the earth. It is a strange kind of consensus, unlikely coincidence for peoples separated by oceans and millennia. The stories differ in detail, yet converge on a haunting theme: water rising beyond control, erasing what came before. Consider the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest texts known. There, the survivor Utnapishtim recounts how the gods decided to cleanse the earth. He builds a boat, loads it with seeds of life, and after 7 days of flood, releases birds to test if land has returned. Centuries later, the Hebrew account of Noah echoes the same sequence. Divine warning, a vessel, birds sent forth, a covenant after the waters recede. Across the seas in China, the tale of Gun-Yu describes great floods tamed only through monumental engineering. The Norse remembered Ymir's blood flooding the earth, while in Polynesia, the trickster Maui speaks of deluges sent to wipe away arrogant ancestors. If each culture simply invented a story, why do they all imagine water as the instrument of reset? Why not fire, or famine, or plague alone? The answer may lie in water's peculiar ability to erase. Fire blackens, but it leaves ash and ruin. War devastates, but walls and bones remain. Water swallows. It levels landscapes, scatters memory, buries monuments beneath silt. To remember a flood is to remember forgetting. The geological record does not deny that water has reshaped the earth. At the end of the last ice age, sea levels rose by over 100 meters as glaciers melted. Entire coastlines vanished. Lands like Doggerland between Britain and Europe sank beneath the North Sea. The Sunda Shelf that once connected Southeast Asia fractured into islands. To those who lived there, it would not have been gradual change, but calamity. Rivers swelled, fields drowned, mountains became islands. The memory of this trauma may have crystallized into myth, but what if there was more? What if those who survived were not merely hunter-gatherers clinging to rafts, but heirs of a civilization? Imagine cities whose streets are now seafloor, libraries turned to sediment, temples dissolved into coral. To us, it would appear as though they never existed. To those who lived through it, the only way to preserve memory was to wrap it in story, in sacred tale, in warnings passed from tongue to tongue. When we ask whether the Great Flood was civilization's first reset, we are really asking, what did it erase? Did it draw a curtain over a forgotten age of knowledge, forcing humanity to begin again? Or was it simply a turning of natural cycles, catastrophic yet ordinary in the planet's long rhythms? The myths do not give us certainty, they give us fragments, birds released into storm, mountains crowned with arcs, gods weary of mankind. And so the question lingers in the dark waters. If the flood was the dividing line, what lies on the other side of it? As the rivers of myth and geology converge, the current carries us forward, toward landscapes where the earth itself bears the scars of cataclysm. Dawn over the American Northwest reveals a land that seems torn open by giants. Deep coulees stretch for miles, their walls jagged like scars. Valleys abruptly end in cliffs, as though rivers once roared there but then vanished. On the basalt plains, ripples larger than hills curve across the earth, stone waves frozen in place. To the untrained eye, these features are strange but silent. To geologists, they speak of forces too violent for ordinary time. For decades, mainstream science resisted such conclusions. The early 20th century geologist J. Harlan Bretz insisted that this chaotic terrain, the channeled scablands of Washington, was carved not by eons of gentle rivers, but by floods so immense they would dwarf anything humanity has ever seen. He described walls of water hundreds of feet high, unleashed when glacial dams collapsed. His peers laughed at him. Catastrophes were the stuff of myth, not science. The prevailing dogma of uniformitarianism demanded that landscapes change slowly, incrementally, over millions of years. To suggest otherwise was heresy, and yet the land itself bore witness. Bretz's surveys documented canyons that ended abruptly, waterfalls without rivers to feed them, dry cataracts so large they could dwarf Niagara. He mapped immense gravel bars, fields of erratic boulders deposited far from their source, and ripple marks so vast they stretched across entire valleys. No ordinary stream, however ancient, could explain them. Still, the scientific community resisted, dismissing his ideas as dramatic exaggeration. Decades later, evidence vindicated him. Aerial photography and eventually satellite imagery revealed patterns invisible from the ground, vast scours across eastern Washington that aligned with the catastrophic flood model. Research uncovered the source. Glacial Lake Missoula, a body of water held in check by an ice dam more than 2,000 feet tall. When that dam failed, perhaps repeatedly, it released a torrent equal to the combined flow of every river on Earth. The flood surged across the Columbia Plateau, stripping away topsoil, grinding basalt into gravel, and carving canyons in days. Water thundered toward the Pacific at speeds of 60 miles per hour, carrying house-sized boulders as though they were pebbles. The channeled scablands are not unique. Across the globe, landscapes bear similar scars. In Montana, the Kama's Prairie ripple fields rise as high as 4-story buildings, their crests frozen waves of stone left behind by floodwaters. In Central Asia, along the Altai Mountains of Siberia, geologists have found giant gravel bars and stranded boulders pointing to sudden megafloods cascading from glacial lakes. In Iceland, Jökullaups, catastrophic glacial outburst floods, still occur today, though on a smaller scale, offering a living example of how ice and water can transform terrain almost overnight. Even further afield, the English Channel bears traces of sudden inundation. Sonar mapping reveals a vast submerged valley, evidence of a catastrophic flood that once tore through when meltwaters breached a natural dam connecting Britain to continental Europe. The violent event separated the island permanently from the mainland. To the people living there, such a rupture would have been apocalyptic, the world literally split apart by water. Each of these examples underscores a point that myths had long whispered. Water does not always creep forward slowly, eroding grain by grain. Sometimes it rushes like a beast unleashed, reshaping continents in days. And when such floods roar across landscapes, they do not only erase soil and stone, they erase memory, uprooting entire lifeways, scattering peoples, and drowning the evidence of their existence. Standing in the Grand Coulee today, the silence is deceptive. Dry falls tower 400 feet high and 3 miles wide, dwarfing Niagara, yet no river flows there. The cliffs hang like the frozen aftermath of an event beyond imagination. To wander among the coulees is to walk inside a fossilized flood, a memory of water's fury etched into stone. The land becomes its own witness, telling us of cataclysms that human history barely recalls. How does this connect to the idea of civilization's first reset? If such forces could scour landscapes clean, then villages, farms, even cities in their path would not simply be destroyed. They would be obliterated. Wooden homes, clay tablets, woven textiles, and fragile bones would leave little trace. Survivors would have no ruins to point back to, only stories of torrents that swallowed everything. Myths of the Great Flood may be these memories, carried forward in allegory because the physical record was washed away. Consider the trauma of watching a world vanish. Imagine families on the banks of glacial Lake Missoula hearing cracks echo through the ice dam, then seeing a wall of water rising beyond the horizon. Within hours, valleys would be scoured clean, forests uprooted, herds of animals swept away. Survivors on nearby high ground would look down at plains transformed into seas, at familiar landmarks erased. What language could describe it, except in mythic terms of gods and punishment? The persistence of flood stories across cultures gains weight when paired with these landscapes. The earth itself confirms what myth remembers, that there were moments when water did not behave as a trickle, but as a force of annihilation. Brett's vindication showed that catastrophic flooding is not fantasy, but fact, a reality inscribed in stone. If the land can be reset, why not civilization? What we see in the scablands, in ripple fields and submerged valleys, is not just geology. It is a reminder that the world we inhabit has been erased and redrawn before. The Great Flood remembered in myth may have been one of these erasures, the first reset that severed humanity from a deeper, forgotten past. And if land can drown in a matter of days, how many coastlines, how many settlements, how many worlds might still lie beneath the sea, waiting to be rediscovered? That question leads us from the scars on continents to the silence of submerged plains, the drowned homelands of our forgotten ancestors. Beneath the grey waters of the North Sea lies a country that no map remembers. 10,000 years ago, before glaciers melted and seas rose, this was not an ocean but a land of rivers and green plains, a place where aurochs grazed and hunters stalked red deer across meadows dotted with birch and pine. Archaeologists call it Doggerland, but to those who once lived there, it was simply home. Today, trawlers drag up antlers, bones, and stone tools from the seabed, mute witnesses of a world drowned. Doggerland is not an isolated case. Across the globe, drowned landscapes sleep beneath the waves, ghostly reminders of the violent end of the Ice Age. Off the coast of India, in the Gulf of Khambhat, sonar mapping revealed rectilinear patterns, grids and foundations more than 100 feet underwater. Samples dated to roughly 9,000 years ago suggest habitation long before the rise of the Indus Valley civilization. Divers reported artifacts resembling beads, pottery shards, and carvings, all now hidden beneath murky tides. To the southeast, the Sunda Shelf once united Indonesia, Malaysia, and surrounding islands into a single vast continent. At the peak of the Ice Age, this landmass supported rivers the size of the Ganges, fertile valleys where communities may have thrived. When the glaciers melted, seas advanced, breaking the continent into the archipelagos we know today. To those who witnessed it, the transformation must have felt like the gods splitting the earth into pieces, swallowing entire landscapes overnight. Myths from Java, Bali, and Polynesia still tell of islands that sank and ancestors who fled by canoe to higher ground. Further north, Japan guards its own mystery. Near the island of Yonaguni, divers discovered stepped terraces, geometric walls, and what seemed to be stone platforms lying over 100 feet beneath the surface. Mainstream archaeology insists they are natural formations shaped by tectonics and erosion. Yet many divers and researchers argue the angles are too precise, the walls too deliberate. Some claim to see stairways, streets, and even animal carvings etched into stone. If Yonaguni was indeed a city, then it predates every known civilization by millennia. Other coastlines tell similar stories. The legendary city of Dwarka, long described in Hindu texts, was dismissed as myth until marine archaeologists uncovered ruins in the Gulf of Cambay. Submerged walls, streets and grids appear where ancient Sanskrit epics said they would be. Carbon dating of materials retrieved nearby placed them at around 9,000 years old, aligning with the period of rising seas at the end of the Ice Age. What was once scripture became archaeology. Even Europe carries its drowned memory. Off the coasts of Cornwall and Brittany, sailors tell of sunken kingdoms, Lyonesse, where church bells are said to toll beneath the water. Archaeological surveys reveal submerged forests, stumps still rooted to the seabed, silent witnesses to lands once walked by human feet. In the Baltic, divers have mapped stone alignments beneath the waves of the Mecklenburg Bay, suggesting structures deliberately placed before the sea claimed them. The scale of these losses is staggering. Between 20,000 and 7,000 years ago, global sea level rose by more than 100 meters. Coastlines retreated miles inland. Imagine today's great coastal cities, New York, Tokyo, London, Shanghai, vanishing underwater in the space of a few generations. Ports, temples, libraries, and entire cultural hearts would dissolve into sediment. Survivors on higher ground would inherit not ruins, but absence, their memories distilled into myths of floods and gods. Mythology reflects this trauma. In Polynesian chants, whole homelands are described as sinking beneath the ocean, forcing migrations across thousands of miles. Celtic lore preserves the tale of Cantrea Gwaelod, a kingdom drowned off the coast of Wales, its bells still audible in storms. In the Bible, Noah's Ark rests on the mountains after a flood that covered the earth. In Mesopotamia, Utnapishtim sails across waters where cities once stood. Across the globe, the refrain is the same. Water rose, and the old world was no more. Geology confirms the violence of these transformations. Around 6200 BCE, the Storegga slide off Norway's coast triggered tsunamis that surged across the North Atlantic, drowning lowlands in Britain and Ireland. Sediment cores reveal sudden layers of saltwater intrusion in formerly freshwater marshes. In an instant, farms and villages would have been erased. Similar events are recorded in the Mediterranean, the Black Sea, and the Pacific. The end of the Ice Age was not a gentle warming, but a series of shocks, each one cutting deeper into humanity's memory. What does this mean for the idea of the Great Flood as civilization's first reset? These drowned lands are not just anomalies, they are the graves of forgotten worlds. Doggerland, Dwarka, Sundaland, Yonaguni, each hints at communities, perhaps even advanced cultures, lost beneath the waves. When sea levels rose, they took with them not only people, but the continuity of memory. Survivors rebuilt on higher ground, carrying fragments of story but little else. Civilization had to begin again, reset by water. Picture it, a family watching from a hillside as the plains below vanish beneath the sea. Fields where ancestors sowed grain, gone. Villages where stories were told, gone. In a single lifetime, the world remade itself, leaving only the ocean's horizon. How could such an experience not etch itself into myth, repeated for millennia until it became the flood stories we know today? The ocean is vast, covering more than 2/3 of the planet. We have explored only a fraction of its depths. How many cities lie buried beneath its silence? How many libraries of stone or clay dissolve in saltwater darkness? How many proofs of civilizations before us remain unseen, waiting to be found? If the Great Flood was the first reset, then the oceans are its vault, holding secrets in layers of silt and coral. The question is whether we will ever uncover them, or whether they are meant to remain hidden until another cycle begins. And that is where I'd like to leave you tonight, with a gentle question. Do you believe our coastlines hide the ruins of forgotten civilizations? Or are these only myths reshaped by time? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this journey into the drowned past stirs your imagination, consider subscribing. So together, we can keep following the whispers of worlds the waters tried to erase. Imagine this, the most extraordinary temple complex ever discovered, a site older than Stonehenge by 7 millennia, deliberately buried by the very people who built it. Not toppled by enemies, not weathered into ruin, but hidden, sealed beneath tons of soil as though its makers wanted to ensure it would vanish from sight. That is Gobekli Tepe, perched on a hill in southeastern Turkey. When archaeologists first scraped away its earth in the 1990s, they uncovered a riddle that shook the timeline of civilization itself. Who builds something so monumental, then hides it from the world? And why? The site itself is breathtaking. From the hilltop rise massive T-shaped limestone pillars, some over 16 feet tall and weighing 20 tons. They are arranged in circles, carefully oriented, like silent stone gatherings frozen in time. Their surfaces are carved with foxes, cranes, wild boar, lions, serpents, vultures, and abstract symbols. The craftsmanship is astonishing, reliefs cut with skill and imagination, revealing a worldview that is anything but primitive. This was not the work of wandering tribes idly stacking stones. It was the effort of organized communities with vision, knowledge, and intention. Mainstream archaeology once insisted that such complexity could only emerge after agriculture, after stable villages produced surplus and specialization. Yet Göbekli Tepe turns that story upside down. It predates agriculture by thousands of years, suggesting the reverse may be true. It was not farming that made temples possible, but temples, and the rituals around them, that may have inspired farming. People gathered here to build, to worship, to align themselves with something larger than survival. Civilization, in other words, may have been born on this hilltop. And yet, the greatest mystery is not in its age or design, but in its burial. The enclosures were not abandoned to the winds. They were intentionally filled in, entombed in layers of soil, rubble, and refuse until no trace remained on the surface. For thousands of years the hill lay quiet, a secret kept from history. What compels a people to conceal their most sacred creation? Was it fear of an approaching disaster? A deliberate act of preservation? Or a ritual closure, a symbolic act meant to hide knowledge until another age could uncover it? Some researchers suggest Gobekli Tepe may even encode memories of a cosmic event. On one pillar, a series of animal carvings appears to map constellations in the sky. Scholars from the University of Edinburgh propose that these symbols represent a comet strike around 10,800 BCE, an impact many connect to the Younger Dryas, the sudden cooling and catastrophic floods that marked the end of the Ice Age. If this interpretation is correct, the builders of Gobekli Tepe were astronomers as well as masons, recording not just myths, but a cataclysm in stone. Imagine survivors of that world, carving the sky's warning into pillars, then burying the site so it would endure when they could not. The sense of purpose here is palpable. To walk among the excavated enclosures today is to step inside a message from deep time. The symmetry of the circles, the way the central pillars loom like guardians, the symbols etched into their flanks, they feel less like random decoration and more like language. We may not yet read it, but we sense its gravity. It is as though the builders whispered, "Remember, something happened, something will happen again." Even the very act of carving tells us of forgotten sophistication. Limestone is soft enough to be worked, but shaping and transporting multi-ton blocks requires tools, planning, and communal effort. How did so-called hunter-gatherers achieve this? Where did they acquire the geometry to arrange pillars with astronomical precision? These are not accidental alignments. The circles frame solstices and horizons, embedding cycles of the sky into stone. Local myth lends further intrigue. The region has long been associated with Edenic imagery. Some traditions place the Garden of Eden near the rivers of Mesopotamia, not far from Göbekli Tepe. Could this site, constructed at the dawn of settled human life, be the memory that seeded the story of a paradise lost? A sacred place of origin, later buried beneath earth as the world shifted around it? And then there is the haunting possibility: what if Göbekli Tepe was hidden not from enemies but from the flood itself? If rising waters or sudden cataclysms threatened to erase everything, burying knowledge in stone might have been the only safeguard. The builders could not preserve libraries or cities. Wood rots, clay crumbles, but limestone pillars, buried deep, might survive. And so they did, waiting 12 millennia for our spades and brushes to reveal them again. How does this help us understand the Great Flood as civilization's first reset? Göbekli Tepe is evidence that people before the flood possessed complex thought, symbolic language, astronomical knowledge, and a drive to preserve memory. Its burial suggests awareness of looming catastrophe. It shows us a civilization that tried to resist erasure, not by stopping the reset, but by planting seeds for those who would come after. Picture the last gathering here, fires dying in the enclosures, stones rising solemnly as the soil is heaped upon them, a community sealing its greatest achievement, uncertain if anyone will return. Then silence, centuries of silence, millennia of silence, until one day the earth is peeled back and we stand blinking in the same place, asking the same questions. What else lies hidden, waiting for rediscovery? If Göbekli Tepe was concealed so carefully, how many other sanctuaries remain buried beneath fields, deserts, or seas? And how much of our story is still waiting to emerge from the shadows? High on the windswept Altiplano of Bolivia, more than 12,000 feet above sea level, lies a ruin so baffling that even seasoned archaeologists struggle to describe it. Pumapunku, the door of the Puma, is not a city in the usual sense. It is a scattering of massive stones, fractured and toppled, lying like the bones of a giant machine. To stand among them is to feel a disquieting sense that something both magnificent and alien to our timeline once stood here. The stones themselves are the enigma. Some weigh more than 130 tons, quarried from miles away and hauled up steep terrain to this plateau. Their surfaces are cut with precision that seems out of place in the pre-Columbian world. Andesite, one of the hardest stones on Earth, has been shaped into crisp right angles, interlocking forms, and surfaces so smooth they almost shine. Among the most famous are the H-blocks, andesite pieces carved with notches and grooves that fit together like parts of a complex puzzle. Even with modern tools, replicating such exactness would be daunting. With stone hammers and copper chisels, as conventional archaeology suggests, it verges on the impossible. Close inspection reveals more mysteries. Some blocks contain perfectly drilled circular holes, as if made by advanced boring equipment. Others display parallel grooves that suggest cutting by saws rather than chisels. Engineers who have examined the site remark that the tolerances approach those used in modern machine work. To find such sophistication in a culture traditionally considered pre-literate raises unsettling questions. Did the Tiwanaku, the civilization often credited with Puma Punku, inherit these techniques from an earlier, forgotten source? Or did they find and reuse stones already ancient in their own time? Local legends add another layer. The Inca, who rose long after the Tiwanaku, claimed that the site was built not by men, but by the gods themselves, or by Viracocha, the great creator deity who emerged from Lake Titicaca after a world-ending flood. In Andean myth, Viracocha shaped the earth and taught survivors the arts of civilization. He raised stones effortlessly, as if by command alone. To the people of the Altiplano, Pumapunku was not merely a ruin, but a sacred threshold, a remnant of divine intervention. Geology hints at cataclysm. The region bears evidence of sudden upheaval. Ancient shorelines traced high above Lake Titicaca's present level, suggesting vast floods that once inundated the plateau. Radiocarbon dating of organic material beneath some of the fallen blocks has yielded dates around 500 CE, aligning with the Tiwanaku culture, yet other findings and interpretations suggest much older origins. The debate is unresolved, but the sense of discontinuity is undeniable. Something about Pumapunku does not fit neatly into the known story of the Andes. To walk the site is to feel the dissonance directly. Imagine standing among the scattered H-blocks, their crisp edges still sharp after centuries of exposure, their grooves lining up as if awaiting reassembly. The stones lie toppled, shattered, some cracked as though by immense force. It feels less like a ruin weathered by time than a structure violently broken, left in fragments. One can almost picture a great temple or platform suddenly struck down, its pieces strewn across the ground like discarded tools. How does this connect to the idea of the Great Flood as civilization's first reset? Pumapunku shows us the kind of anomalies that may be remnants of that earlier world. If advanced techniques existed before the flood, methods of cutting, lifting, and shaping stone beyond what later cultures could manage, then Pumapunku could be one of the last testaments. Perhaps the Tiwanaku inherited the site, building upon what little remained after catastrophe, or perhaps they preserved a memory, echoing techniques without fully understanding their origin. In either case, what we see is not invention from nothing, but continuity across an erasure. The precision of Pumapunku challenges our assumptions. We tend to imagine pre-Columbian peoples as isolated, gradually developing skills over centuries. Yet here, at 12,000 feet, we find evidence of geometry, planning, and engineering that rival achievements in Egypt or Mesopotamia. The implication is unsettling. Knowledge may have existed globally before the reset, scattered survivors carrying fragments of it into different lands. Each culture then rebuilt as best it could, but none retained the full scope of what came before. Consider the sheer logistics, moving 100-ton blocks across uneven terrain without the wheel, without draft animals, without iron tools. Conventional explanations suggest ramps, sledges, and brute labour. But at this altitude, the air is thin, the climate harsh. The Tiwanaku had no written language, no known system of pulleys or cranes, and yet the stones stand, or rather lie, testifying that somehow it was done. If they accomplished this with simple tools, then we must admit they possessed a genius we can scarcely comprehend. If they did not, then the stones may belong to a different story altogether, one washed away in the flood. Pumapunku may be more than a ruin, it may be a memory. Its shattered blocks whisper of a past when techniques we have lost were common, when humans or their predecessors could marshal resources in ways we no longer believe possible. Like the flood myths, its stones are fragments, clues left after erasure. They remind us that civilization is not a straight ascent from primitive to modern, but a cycle of building, destruction, and rebuilding. To stand at Pumapunku is to stand at the threshold of forgetting and remembering. The wind sweeps the plateau, and the sun burns thin air, but the stones remain. They ask questions we cannot yet answer. Who carved them? What tools did they use? Why were they left in fragments? And most of all, what world vanished when the flood reset civilization, leaving only these impossible blocks behind? In the fertile Bekaa Valley of Lebanon, framed by snow-capped ranges and endless vineyards, a platform of stone rises against the horizon. On this terrace, the Romans built one of their grandest temples, the Temple of Jupiter, a colonnade so immense that its ruins still inspire awe. But beneath the Roman grandeur lies something even older, stranger, and more haunting. Supporting the temple's foundations are blocks of stone so massive they defy belief, each one the size of a small house. These megaliths, known as the trilithon, weigh more than 800 tons apiece. No modern crane could lift them with ease, yet there they sit, perfectly aligned, silent and immovable, as though planted by giants. Even more astonishing is the quarry a short distance away. Here rests the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, half-carved and abandoned, weighing more than 1,000 tons. Nearby, archaeologists recently discovered yet another block still buried in the earth, estimated at over 1,600 tons. Imagine the effort it would take to even shift such a stone, let alone haul it uphill to the terrace and place it with precision. The sheer audacity of it sparks disbelief. If the Romans built Baalbek's soaring columns, who then built the platform upon which their temple stands? Roman records provide no clear answer. They describe the grandeur of their temples but remain silent on how the colossal foundations were laid. Many scholars assume the Romans themselves engineered the platform, but the absence of inscriptions or accounts leaves the possibility open that the trilithon predated them. The Romans were master builders, but they also inherited. In Egypt, they built atop pharaonic ruins. In Greece, they reworked older sanctuaries. At Baalbek, they may have crowned a site already ancient, one whose origins had been forgotten even in their time. Local legends echo this possibility. Folklore claims the stones were raised by giants who roamed the earth before the flood, or by King Solomon's jinn, supernatural beings forced to labour on his great works. Islamic tradition tells of Nimrod, the mighty king who defied heaven, building monuments of impossible scale. To the people who lived in the shadow of Baalbek stones, there was no ordinary explanation. They seemed to belong to an age of myths, not men. To stand before the trilithon is to feel that myth made solid. Each block, longer than a city bus, rests with its face smoothed and edges aligned. No mortar binds them, yet they fit together with uncanny precision. The terrace beneath your feet feels less like a ruin than a stage built for gods, too vast for ordinary worshippers. Even in ruin, it dwarfs the imagination. Engineers attempting to reconstruct the logistic struggle. The blocks had to be quarried, shaped, and transported nearly a kilometre uphill. Ramps of unimaginable size would have been required, demanding more material and labour than the stones themselves. Levering them into place would test even modern machinery. And yet there they are, silent, immovable, defying the very idea of possibility. Geology hints at context. The limestone of the Bekaa Valley is workable, but the decision to carve such enormous monoliths seems unnecessary. Smaller blocks would have sufficed for stability. Why then choose stones so large that they verge on the impossible? Perhaps the builders possessed methods of movement we do not understand, rollers of wood and rope too fragile to survive, or techniques of vibration and leverage lost to time. Or perhaps the stones are remnants of a tradition older than the Romans, older even than recorded history. How does this connect to the Great Flood as civilization's first reset? If a society before the flood mastered techniques of quarrying and moving immense stones, Baalbek could be one of the last traces of their knowledge. When the flood erased that world, the survivors lost the means to replicate such feats. Later civilizations found the foundations and built upon them, layering their temples atop forgotten bones of stone. The trilithon then becomes not merely a foundation but a fossil, a fragment of memory preserved in limestone. The site itself whispers continuity. Baalbek has been sacred for millennia. Phoenicians dedicated it to Baal, the god of storms, Greeks to Zeus, Romans to Jupiter. Each culture repurposed it, yet the platform endured unchanged. That endurance suggests it belonged to a time when permanence was possible, when monuments were made to outlast the very cycles of destruction. Perhaps its builders understood that catastrophe would come, and only stones of such scale could remain when all else was swept away. Even today, the terrace inspires awe tinged with unease. Tourists gaze upward at fallen columns, their minds inevitably drawn not to the Roman ruins but to the foundations beneath. The trilithon stones rest like silent guardians, daring us to explain them. Engineers sketch diagrams, archaeologists debate theories, mystics speak of lost civilizations, and yet no consensus emerges. The stones refuse to yield their secret. How does this deepen our understanding of the reset? It reminds us that not all was erased. Some things endured, too massive for floodwaters to carry, too heavy for new civilizations to dismantle. They stand as silent markers, fragments of continuity between worlds. To later builders, they were curiosities to be used. To us, they are enigmas, evidence that something immense once stood where history is mute. Picture it: waters rising, valleys drowned, cultures swept into silence. Yet here, on a terrace above the floodplain, 3 blocks of stone endure. Everything else is forgotten, but these titans remain, carrying the weight not only of temples but of memory itself. They are the bones of a world reset, waiting for us to notice. And so Baalbek becomes more than a ruin. It becomes a question. Who raised the trilithon? Why such impossible stones? And if they belong to a world erased by the flood, what other fragments of that civilization still lie hidden beneath our feet? Across the endless Pacific, beyond the horizon where stars meet sea, whispers persist of a land that no chart records. A continent vast and fertile, home to cities of stone and temples rising like mountains, swallowed in a single catastrophe. This land is remembered in legend as Mu. To scholars, it is dismissed as fantasy. Yet to storytellers, explorers, and those who listen closely to myth, Mu is more than imagination. It is a ghost continent, perhaps a memory of the world that ended when the Great Flood reset human history. The modern tale of Mu begins in the 19th century. Augustus Le Plongeon, studying Maya inscriptions in Yucatan, believed he had uncovered references to a lost homeland called Mu, from which civilization spread across the globe. Later, James Churchward, a British officer stationed in India, claimed to have studied ancient tablets in a temple archive. These tablets, he said, described a great Pacific continent where humanity first flourished, home to advanced technology and spiritual wisdom. According to Churchward, Mu was destroyed by earthquakes and floods some 12,000 years ago, leaving only scattered islands behind. Mainstream science has long rejected these claims, pointing out that no geological evidence supports the existence of a sunken continent spanning the Pacific. Tectonic plates do not allow such a landmass to simply vanish, and yet the myth persists, because fragments across the ocean seem to echo its outline. Polynesian navigators, among the greatest sailors the world has ever known, told stories of ancestral homelands now beneath the sea. Hawaiian chants recall lands that sank into the depths, while Maori traditions speak of islands lost to rising waters. Could these be memories, compressed over generations into the archetype of Mu? Consider Easter Island, Rapa Nui, a tiny speck of land surrounded by thousands of miles of ocean. Here, colossal moai statues stand with their backs to the sea, gazing inland as if guarding something we can no longer see. When their bodies were excavated, archaeologists found they extended deep into the ground, as though time itself had tried to bury them. How did a small, isolated population erect such monuments, some weighing over 80 tons? Some researchers argue they inherited techniques from a wider, older tradition, perhaps survivors of a drowned homeland who carried fragments of knowledge to distant shores. Across the Pacific, similar echoes emerge. In Micronesia, the megalithic city of Nan Madol sits on artificial islets built of basalt logs stacked like cordwood. Its origin remains mysterious, its builders remembered in local legend as giants or spirits. In Japan, beneath the waters of Yonaguni, stepped terraces and walls appear eerily geometric, though geology debates their origin. In South America, coastal myths speak of Viracocha, a bearded god who arrived from across the sea after a flood, bringing knowledge of agriculture and architecture. These fragments, scattered like stars across the ocean, suggest a constellation of memory. Perhaps not a literal continent named Mu, but a network of cultures tied together before the waters rose. The Pacific is not alone in telling of drowned lands. The Indian Ocean holds the tale of Kumari Kandam, a lost Tamil homeland said to lie beneath its waves. In the Atlantic, Atlantis plays the same role. Each of these stories may be regional expressions of the same trauma. The end of the Ice Age, when glaciers melted and seas surged, swallowing coastal plains worldwide. Mu then becomes less a specific location than a symbol of what was lost, a shorthand for all the homelands drowned in the first Great Reset. Yet symbols carry truth. Geology confirms that during the last deglaciation, global sea levels rose by more than 100 meters. Entire landmasses like Sundaland in Southeast Asia were reduced to archipelagos. Doggerland in northern Europe sank beneath the North Sea. The Bismarck Archipelago, the Torres Strait and countless other low-lying areas were overwhelmed. To the people living through it, it was not a slow, abstract change but a terrifying cataclysm. Villages lost in a single lifetime, coastlines redrawn before their eyes. Their descendants would preserve the memory not in maps, but in song and story, speaking of great continents vanishing beneath the ocean. Mu captures that memory in its most dramatic form. Churchward described it as the motherland of man, a paradise of peace and knowledge undone by cataclysm. Even if his details are invention, the archetype resonates, a cradle of civilization lost to water, a birthplace we cannot return to. The allure lies not in whether Mu existed as a geological reality, but in what it represents. It is the possibility that humanity's story is far older, that great centers of knowledge once thrived where now only waves roll. How does this deepen our understanding of the Great Flood as civilization's first reset? Mu, whether real or symbolic, embodies the erasure. It stands for all the drowned cultures whose cities, rituals, and sciences disappeared beneath rising seas. When we speak of the flood, we imagine a single disaster. But when we speak of Mu, we imagine the totality of what was lost. Entire worlds, vanished from sight, leaving only scattered survivors to rebuild. Picture it for a moment. A continent alive with music, markets, temples, and harbours. Priests charting the stars, builders shaping stone, families tending fields. Then the earth trembles, waters surge, the horizon darkens. In days, lifetimes of knowledge vanish beneath the ocean's surface. Survivors cling to canoes or high ground, watching their homeland sink, carrying with them fragments of memory. To them, the world ended. To their descendants, it became legend. And so Mu survives, not in stone but in imagination. Each Moai face, each Polynesian chant, each tale of islands that sank is a ripple of its memory. Whether we call it Mu, Kumari Kandam, or Atlantis, the pattern is the same. A reminder that the sea is not only a giver of life, but a keeper of secrets. What else lies beneath those waves? Could sonar and submersible drones one day reveal foundations of cities drowned before history began? Or will Mu remain forever a continent of the mind, a symbol of humanity's first reset? When Plato first told the story of Atlantis, it was presented not as fiction but as history. He claimed his ancestor Solon had heard the tale from Egyptian priests. A mighty island empire beyond the Pillars of Hercules, rich in metals and harvests, skilled in engineering and warfare. Atlantis was described as a marvel of canals, temples plated in orichalcum, and fleets that reached across the seas. Then, in a single day and night, the island was consumed by earthquakes and floods, vanishing beneath the ocean. To the Greeks, it was a moral parable about hubris, but to us, it lingers as the most famous memory of a lost world. The details Plato gives are striking. Atlantis was said to lie in concentric rings of land and water, with bridges and causeways connecting its harbours to the sea. Its rulers commanded armies that threatened Athens itself. Its people possessed knowledge far beyond their time, blending geometry, astronomy, and navigation. Then suddenly, it was gone. An entire civilization reset in the blink of an eye. Skeptics argue Plato invented Atlantis as allegory, a cautionary tale dressed as history. Yet the persistence of the myth, and its uncanny resemblance to flood traditions around the globe, suggests otherwise. Could Atlantis be a memory, distorted but real, of cities drowned when the Ice Age ended and seas rose over the world's coastlines? The modern search for Atlantis has been fueled by discoveries that seem too curious to dismiss. In 1968, divers off the island of Bimini in the Bahamas stumbled upon massive limestone blocks arranged in a line stretching hundreds of meters along the seabed. Dubbed the Bimini Road, the formation looks like a causeway or breakwater. Conventional geology explains it as natural beach rock fractured by tides, but the geometry, straight edges, right angles, fitted stones, convinced many that this was no accident. To believers, the Bimini Road was a remnant of Atlantis, finally breaking the surface of myth into reality. Nearby discoveries add weight to the speculation. Off Cuba's western coast, sonar surveys in 2001 revealed what appeared to be geometric structures nearly 600 meters below the surface. Rectilinear patterns resembling avenues, plazas, and pyramids. The depth suggests submersion more than 10,000 years ago, around the time Plato's story places Atlantis' fall. In the Mediterranean, divers have found submerged cities off the coasts of Greece and Turkey, with streets and temples eerily reminiscent of Plato's descriptions. While none of these sites have been definitively linked to Atlantis, they remind us that the sea conceals more history than it reveals. The Atlantic itself bears scars of sudden upheaval. Around 8,200 years ago, glacial meltwater floods from North America disrupted ocean currents, causing abrupt sea level rise and climate chaos. Some scientists link this to the drowning of coastal cultures, whose memory may have persisted as the tale of Atlantis. To people watching their farmlands vanish beneath waves, it would have felt like divine punishment, a reset that erased everything. Imagery sharpens the sense of loss. Picture a harbour city alive with sails, traders bargaining in markets, priests charting constellations on temple walls. Then imagine the ground trembling, seawalls crumbling, and torrents rushing in. Ships snap their moorings, people flee to rooftops, fires flicker before being doused. In hours, lifetimes of knowledge sink into darkness. For survivors, the story becomes myth, retold as the fall of a proud empire swallowed by the sea. Atlantis may not have been one place, but many. The drowned cities of the Mediterranean, the mysterious ruins of Bimini, the Cuban seafloor anomalies, all could be fragments of the same memory, compressed into a single legend. Myths tend to simplify, to condense diverse traumas into archetypes. Atlantis then becomes the archetype of the first reset, a world undone by water, its lessons preserved in allegory. How does this connect to our central question of the Great Flood as civilization's first reset? Atlantis embodies the trauma of erasure. It is the cautionary tale of an advanced world wiped away by cataclysm, its knowledge lost except for whispers. Whether it was a literal island empire or a symbolic composite of drowned homelands, it illustrates the same truth. Civilizations can vanish suddenly, leaving behind only legends and anomalies that hint at what once was. The Bimini Road and the Cuban ruins are tantalizing because they force us to reconsider Plato's words. What if he was not inventing, but preserving? What if Atlantis was not allegory, but memory? A civilization advanced enough to build canals, harbours, and temples, undone in a single surge of sea. And so we arrive at the hook that lingers, unsettling and irresistible. What if Atlantis was real? What if the Bimini Road is not a trick of geology, but the last visible trace of a drowned world? And if we can find Atlantis beneath the waves, what else might still be hidden, waiting for us to discover? Across the mythologies of the world, one image recurs like a half-forgotten dream. Beings of enormous stature, towering above ordinary men, striding across landscapes that no longer exist. In the Hebrew Bible, they are the Nephilim, mighty men of old, men of renown. In Greece, the Titans ruled before Zeus, and the Olympians seized the heavens. Norse sagas tell of the Jötnar, frost giants whose battles shook the 9 worlds. In the Andes, legends describe Chulpa, giants who built tall stone towers before being swept away by a flood sent from the gods. In Polynesia, tales speak of the first settlers as men so tall they could lift canoes over reefs with ease. Why are giants so universal? Were they simply metaphors for strength, or did ancient peoples remember something more literal? The pattern is hard to dismiss. Again and again, stories place giants in the time before the Great Flood. And again, the flood arrives to wipe them away, leaving only smaller, weaker humanity in their place. Archaeology adds its own layer of intrigue. 19th and early 20th century newspapers in North America contain accounts of oversized skeletons unearthed in burial mounds, skulls with double rows of teeth, femurs far longer than expected. Many of these finds have since disappeared into private collections or museum archives, fueling speculation that evidence of giants was deliberately suppressed. In Peru, elongated skulls discovered in Paracas have stirred controversy, though most are explained as the result of cranial deformation. Yet even here, the persistence of anomaly keeps the debate alive. Consider the great stones of Sacsayhuaman in Peru. The walls, some blocks weighing more than 100 tons, are fitted together with uncanny precision. Local lore claims they were built by giants, for ordinary men could never have lifted them. The Inca themselves admitted they inherited such walls, crediting earlier, more powerful beings. To walk among the zigzag fortifications today is to feel dwarfed, as though built for hands and eyes larger than our own. In the Middle East, too, memory lingers. The Book of Enoch, excluded from most biblical canons, describes how the Watchers, beings who descended from heaven, took human wives, producing offspring of immense size. These giants devoured crops, drank rivers dry, and brought violence to the earth. Their corruption, the text says, was one of the reasons the flood came, to cleanse the world of their presence. In this telling, the deluge is not just nature's wrath, but a deliberate reset to erase a race that had grown too powerful. Even modern genetics adds a whisper. Studies of ancient DNA reveal ghost populations, lineages that no longer exist, but left traces in our genomes. These do not prove giants, but they hint that humanity once shared the earth with groups now lost to history, erased not only from the ground but from memory. Could the legends of giants be cultural echoes of such vanished kin? Imagine the world as the myths describe it. Cities and temples populated not only by humans like us, but by towering figures whose lifespans stretched for centuries. They might have been rulers, priests, or builders, their stature setting them apart. Their downfall, whether through arrogance or sheer numbers, became the justification for catastrophe. The flood arrives, sweeping their world away, leaving ordinary humans to begin anew. Giants become the shadowy before to our after. The imagery is compelling. Picture the great blocks of Puma Punku or Baalbek, raised not with ropes and pulleys, but by beings whose strength made the impossible seem ordinary. Picture oral traditions, passed down by survivors, trying to capture the memory of a time when the earth was shared with creatures larger, stronger, perhaps wiser, perhaps more dangerous than ourselves. When such stories cross continents, from the Americas to Eurasia to Oceania, they suggest not invention, but remembrance. What does this tell us about the Great Flood as civilization's first reset? It suggests that the flood was more than just an environmental disaster. It was a dividing line between ages, a curtain drawn over a world where giants walked, resetting humanity into a smaller, weaker, yet more enduring form. If giants were real, they may have been erased to give our kind a second chance. If symbolic, they represent the height of a civilization so extraordinary it became myth once it was gone. Standing in the shadow of megalithic walls, we cannot help but wonder, were these stones built for human hands or for those of giants who perished in the flood? Are we walking on a world already reset once, perhaps twice, perhaps many times? And if so, what does that say about our own place in the cycle? The truth may never be settled. Giants may remain forever in the realm of story, or one day bones might emerge from the ground to shift history once again. Until then, they linger as symbols of a world we can sense but cannot fully grasp. The world before the flood, erased in water but not in memory. Where are you listening from tonight, and what time is it there? If you find yourself drawn to these mysteries, giants, floods, civilizations erased and reborn, consider subscribing to the channel. Together, we'll keep following the whispers of forgotten worlds, searching for what lies hidden on the far side of memory. It remains one of history's strangest puzzles. The first writing systems appear suddenly, not as hesitant scratches, but as fully realized languages. In Mesopotamia, the Sumerians begin carving cuneiform on clay tablets with an already sophisticated grammar, recording not just trade but law, astronomy, and myth. In Egypt, hieroglyphs arrive with the ability to express theology, calendars, and the geometry of pyramids. In the Indus Valley, undeciphered seals show animals, gods, and symbols repeated with the consistency of a language already mature. There are no gradual steps, no childlike alphabets growing toward complexity. It is as if humanity remembered, rather than invented, the art of writing. Architecture tells the same story. The Great Pyramid at Giza is aligned to true north within a fraction of a degree, its base nearly perfect in square. At Stonehenge, the megaliths frame solstices and eclipses, creating a calendar in stone. In Mesoamerica, the Maya built observatories to track Venus with precision rivaling modern astronomy. How did such advanced knowledge appear so suddenly in disparate places? Was it coincidence or inheritance? Myths often hold the answer. The Sumerians said their gods, the Anunnaki, descended from the heavens to give mankind the arts of civilization. In Egypt, Thoth was the divine scribe, gifting hieroglyphs to humanity. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl was remembered as the feathered serpent who taught men how to plant maize, measure time, and honor the stars. In India, the Vedic texts describe gods whispering cosmic hymns that contain both sound and number, poetry and mathematics. Each culture, separated by oceans, insists knowledge came suddenly, from outside, or perhaps from above. The flood sits like a boundary line in these myths. Before the deluge, beings of power, giants, gods, or sages, walked the earth. Afterward, fragments of their wisdom survive through chosen survivors. This may explain why writing, geometry, and astronomy appear fully formed. They were not inventions of the new world, but memories of the old, carried through the reset in myth and symbol. Consider sacred geometry. Across continents, temples encode the same ratios. The golden mean, 1.1.618, found in seashells, hurricanes, and galaxies. The spiral of the Nautilus echoes in carvings at ancient sites from Ireland to India. The Fibonacci sequence appears in the layout of Maya temples and in the dimensions of Angkor Wat. How could civilizations isolated by oceans converge on the same mathematical forms unless they were inheriting a common template? Geometry may have been the language of memory, a way to preserve knowledge in shapes that would outlast fire, flood, and forgetting. Symbols themselves act like seeds. The swastika, long before its corruption in modern times, appears in Neolithic carvings across Eurasia, in Native American pottery, and in Hindu temples. It represented the rotation of the heavens, the eternal cycle of destruction and renewal. The same spiral can be found in petroglyphs in the American Southwest and in Celtic stone carvings. The serpent, too, slithers across mythologies, sometimes as wisdom, sometimes as chaos, always powerful, always liminal. These recurring motifs suggest that myth is not random but a code, preserving fragments of understanding across resets. Even the oldest epics speak of knowledge as inheritance. The Sumerian king list records reigns of rulers before the flood lasting thousands of years, then shorter lifespans after the deluge. It reads as though the reset diminished humanity itself, compressing what once stretched long. The Bible echoes this, with patriarchs living centuries before the flood and mere decades afterward. Myth here is not allegory but recalibration, a world of giants, gods, and long lives reset into the smaller span of ordinary human history. Archaeological anomalies reinforce the sense of disruption. The Antikythera mechanism, a 2,000-year-old Greek device, contained gears so precise they rival 18th century clocks. It could predict eclipses and chart planetary movements, as if preserving knowledge from an earlier age. The Phaistos disc from Crete, with its undeciphered spiral of stamped symbols, suggests printing technology millennia ahead of its time. These are not inventions isolated in history, but echoes, survivals of knowledge slipping through cracks in the reset. What does this tell us about the Great Flood as civilization's first reset? It shows us that knowledge was not erased completely. It was fractured, scattered, encoded in myth, symbol, and story. Survivors carried fragments in memory, embedding them in carvings, chants, and rituals. Later cultures inherited these fragments and built upon them, creating the impression of sudden leaps. But perhaps they were not leaps at all, merely rediscoveries of what had once been known. Imagine a priest carving a spiral on stone, not to invent, but to remember. Imagine a scribe inscribing a hymn, not as creation, but as preservation. Imagine a people aligning their temples to Orion, not as invention, but as inheritance. Each act is a memory disguised as a beginning. Each myth is a seed planted in the soil of forgetting, waiting for us to read. The flood then becomes not just an end, but a filter. It erased libraries, monuments, and technologies, but it could not erase symbols. Stories carried in the mind, numbers hidden in proportion, shapes etched into temples. These became the carriers of lost knowledge. Our civilizations are built not on empty ground, but on fragments salvaged from a reset. And so the question lingers. How much of what we consider humanity's firsts are truly firsts, and how much are recoveries from before the flood? Are we the inheritors of wisdom older than we dare to admit, wisdom disguised in myth until we learn to see it again? Before the rivers swelled and before the seas rose, many of the world's oldest stories speak first of fire. Not gentle hearth flames, but fire from the heavens, uncontrolled, all-consuming, a terror that scorched the earth and darkened the sky. Long before the flood, they say, came a storm of flame. In India's Mahabharata, the war between rival clans climaxes with weapons so fierce they burn the ground itself. The text speaks of a projectile charged with all the power of the universe, exploding with a brilliance brighter than 10,000 suns. Warriors' hair and nails fell out, birds dropped from the sky, rivers boiled, and the earth groaned. To modern ears, such descriptions sound unnervingly like radiation burns and fallout. The language may be poetic, but the imagery is not of swords and arrows, it is of annihilation. Greek mythology preserves a parallel. Phaethon, son of the sun god Helios, begged to drive his father's chariot across the heavens. Unable to control the flaming steeds, he veered too close to the earth, scorching plains and drying rivers until Zeus struck him down with a thunderbolt. The parable may be moral, yet beneath it is memory. Skies alight, the world burned, and ruin descending from above. Among the Hopi, stories tell that the world before ours ended in fire. The earth was scorched, the air filled with cinders, before floods came to cleanse the ashes. In Norse myth, Ragnarok begins with flames that consume the cosmos, followed by waters that drown what remains. Again and again, myth insists. Before water reset the world, fire did. Geology does not contradict this sequence. Around 12,800 years ago, at the dawn of the Younger Dryas, a sudden cooling plunged the world back into near-glacial conditions. Many scientists now suspect a cosmic trigger, a fragmented comet striking or exploding in the atmosphere. Across North America, archaeologists have identified a thin black layer of sediment known as the black mat. Within it lie nanodiamonds, microspherules, and melted glass, materials formed only under intense heat and pressure. Beneath this layer, mammoths, mastodons, and saber-toothed cats still roamed. Above it, they vanish. Imagine that moment. A fiery sky, shockwaves racing across continents, forests erupting in flames. Herds of animals collapse in smoke, rivers steam, and the horizon glows with falling stars. In an instant, ecosystems collapse. To human eyes, this would have seemed like judgment itself, the sky turning against the earth. The consequences cascaded. Vast ice sheets, already fragile, cracked under the sudden heat. Meltwater poured into the oceans, raising sea levels, destabilizing climates, and triggering the very floods remembered in global myth. Fire was the spark. Water was the echo. Survivors, generations later, may have remembered only that the world before theirs ended in a chain of fire and flood. Archaeology hints that this trauma left deliberate marks. At Göbekli Tepe, one carved pillar known as the Vulture Stone appears to depict constellations aligned with a catastrophic event dated to the Younger Dryas. Some scholars interpret it as a sky map recording a comet strike, a warning carved in stone, preserved long after memory had faded. If so, then the builders were not merely masons, but witnesses, encoding cosmic disaster into symbols for future generations. Other sites reinforce the possibility of fire before flood. In North America, mammoth carcasses have been found with bones cracked by sudden heating. In Alaska and Siberia, frozen mammoths lie with food still in their mouths, as if struck down in an instant. Charcoal layers dating to the Younger Dryas appear across 4 continents, testifying to wildfires of unprecedented scale. The planet itself still carries the scars of a time when skies rained fire. Even myths of divine weapons may preserve distorted memories of such events. The thunderbolts of Zeus, the celestial arrows of Apollo, the fiery discs of the Hindu gods, all may be narrative echoes of meteor showers or impacts witnessed by terrified eyes. Where science sees craters and glassy debris, mythology remembers gods in battle, weapons too great for mortals to wield. What does this mean for the idea of the Great Flood as civilization's first reset? It suggests the reset was not a single calamity, but a sequence. First fire, then water. Fire shattered the skies, destabilized climates, and melted glaciers. The oceans rose, floods raged, and the world as it was ended. To the survivors, it must have felt like the gods themselves were rewriting creation. To their descendants, it became a cautionary tale. Hubris and violence bring fire. Fire summons flood, and flood resets the world. Picture a community on the edge of an ice age plain. One night the stars seem brighter, then multiply, then move. A great light streaks across the sky, followed by thunder louder than mountains collapsing. The horizon blazes. In days, rivers swell with blackened ice, carrying forests and beasts in their torrent. In memory, these two events, fire and flood, merge into one apocalypse. The silence after such chaos would have been almost unbearable. Forests turned to ash, skies dimmed with smoke, seas creeping over familiar shores. The survivors did not have libraries or laboratories to preserve what had happened. They had stories. Around fires, they spoke of gods, of fire from heaven, of floods sent to cleanse. These stories became myth. Myth became scripture, and scripture became our faint thread back to the first reset. And perhaps that is the deeper lesson. The flood did not come alone. It was the second act in a drama that began with fire. Fire prepared the world for the waters, setting the stage for the reset of civilization. To forget that sequence is to miss how fragile our world truly is. When the waters receded and the world was new again, many cultures tell of strangers who appeared. Figures unlike ordinary men, bearing knowledge as if carried from another age. They arrive mysteriously, emerging from mountains, striding from the sea, descending from the skies. Their role is not conquest but instruction. They are remembered as gods, sages, or culturebringers, but perhaps they were something simpler. Survivors of the flood who carried fragments of a lost civilization into the age that followed. In the high Andes, the figure of Viracocha looms largest. Legends say he appeared at Lake Titicaca after a great deluge had drowned the land. He was described as tall, bearded, clothed in a white robe. He taught the people to farm, to shape stone, to worship the heavens. Some stories say he could command the sun and stars, while others recall that he walked until he vanished across the Pacific, promising to return. Even the mighty Inca, centuries later, claimed to inherit his wisdom rather than originate it. In Viracocha, we glimpse a teacher whose roots lay not in the Andes, but in an older, forgotten world. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, fulfills a similar role. He is said to have given maize to humanity, taught the cycles of Venus, and established laws and rituals. He is remembered as both man and god, a bringer of balance who opposed needless sacrifice. Legends say he too departed across the sea, vowing to return. To the Aztecs, his image was so powerful that when the Spanish arrived centuries later, some wondered if Quetzalcoatl had come back, carrying once again the power of an older age. In Mesopotamia, the Babylonians told of Oannes, a being half man, half fish, who rose from the Persian Gulf each day to teach writing, mathematics, and agriculture before returning each night to the sea. He brought knowledge so suddenly and completely that the people could only describe him as divine. Later traditions multiplied his kind into the Apkallu, 7 sages, each linked with a city, each a bearer of civilization. Could these tales be memories of shipborne survivors, mariners who preserved fragments of a drowned world's science and seeded them anew along fresh coastlines? Egypt too has its culture bringer. Thoth, the ibis-headed god, is remembered as the scribe of the gods, inventor of writing, and keeper of wisdom. To him were attributed the books of Thoth, said to contain secrets of the stars, medicine, and even resurrection. The Greeks identified him with Hermes Trismegistus, a sage who preserved pre-flood knowledge in hidden texts. Though the books themselves are lost, their legend suggests that wisdom was not created from nothing, but remembered. In India, the flood survivor was Manu. Guided by a divine fish, he built a boat, carried seeds of life, and endured until the waters receded. When the world was new, he taught his descendants agriculture, ritual, and law. The story closely parallels Mesopotamian and biblical flood accounts, but here too, the survivor is not merely one who endures, but one who transmits, a carrier of civilization into the next cycle. These figures share striking patterns. They appear after disaster, when humanity is reduced to wandering survivors. They bring knowledge suddenly: agriculture, astronomy, architecture, law. They often depart mysteriously, suggesting their task was temporary, to plant seeds and then fade into legend. Above all, they are remembered not as ordinary humans, but as something more: divine, animal, hybrid, or celestial. This exaggeration may not reflect their true nature, but rather the awe they inspired in those who received their teachings. To a traumatized people rebuilding from nothing, anyone carrying remnants of advanced knowledge would seem godlike. Archaeological evidence hints that these stories may be rooted in real events. Around 9000–8000 BCE, agriculture emerges in multiple regions almost simultaneously: the Fertile Crescent, the Yangtze, Mesoamerica, the Andes. Likewise, early monumental architecture appears abruptly: the Tower of Jericho, Göbekli Tepe's pillars, ancient irrigation canals in Peru. Such rapid innovation, without obvious precursors, suggests diffusion. Survivors, scattered from flooded coastlines, may have carried seeds, techniques, and ideas inland, igniting new civilizations. Consider the emotional weight of this moment. Imagine standing on a hilltop after floodwaters retreat, the land reshaped, old villages gone. Into this landscape walks a stranger, sunburnt, ragged, carrying a bundle of tools or seeds. He teaches you to plant grain, to watch the stars for seasons, to build shelters from stone. He tells stories of a lost homeland beneath the waves, of gods who destroyed it, of knowledge that must not be forgotten. To you and your kin, he is more than human. He is memory embodied, a messenger from the world before. Even the myths of tricksters and betrayals may carry this echo. Quetzalcoatl is said to have been deceived and cast out. Viracocha departs in sorrow. Thoth vanishes into mystery. The stories end not with permanence but with departure, perhaps reflecting the reality that survivors could not remain forever. They left their wisdom behind, entrusting it to those who came after, while their origins faded into myth. How does this connect to the idea of the Great Flood as civilization's first reset? These Culturebringers illustrate the continuity across Eurasia. The flood destroyed cities, temples, and technologies, but it did not erase memory entirely. Survivors carried fragments forward, fragmentary but powerful enough to restart civilization. Without them, the leap from wandering hunter-gatherers to temple builders and astronomers might not have been so sudden. With them, the spark of the old world ignited the new. Mythology, then, is not only allegory, it is an archive. In the figures of Viracocha, Quetzalcoatl, Oannes, Thoth, and Manu, we glimpse a common pattern: survivors who became gods because they remembered. Their presence suggests that even in the darkest resets, humanity does not start from zero. Knowledge survives in fragile vessels: stories, symbols, and human teachers passed across the floodwaters of forgetting. The cycle of destruction and renewal may be inevitable, but these myths remind us that survival is not just about enduring physically, but about carrying forward the wisdom needed to begin again. The flood may have wiped the slate, but the teachers ensured it was not blank. And so we arrive at a haunting realization: if survivors carried wisdom across the flood once, could the same happen again? Would knowledge from our age be carried into the next reset by a few who endure? If so, what fragments of us would they preserve? Our science, our myths, or only stories told around fires in the ruins? What if the Great Pyramid of Giza was not a tomb at all, but a machine? What if the very heart of Egypt's desert once pulsed with energy, harvested not by wires or engines, but by stone, geometry, and resonance? It is a hypothesis dismissed by orthodox archaeology, yet it refuses to vanish. The idea that ancient monuments were not merely temples but technologies, that they tapped into forces of the earth itself, has become one of the most provocative suggestions in the study of forgotten civilizations. Step inside the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid, and the mystery deepens. The massive granite blocks are fitted with such precision that the chamber resonates like an instrument. Even a low hum vibrates the air in ways that make the walls seem alive. Sound, once released here, does not die. It lingers, echoing like a heartbeat caught in stone. Engineers who have studied the pyramid note its unusual acoustics and the deliberate placement of granite, a stone rich in quartz, which can generate piezoelectric energy when stressed. Was this coincidence or design? Christopher Dunn's pyramid power plant theory dares to propose an answer. He suggests the Great Pyramid functioned as a generator, harnessing vibrations from the earth itself. Narrow shafts in the pyramid may have acted as waveguides, amplifying frequencies. The geometry of the structure may have focused energy like a giant resonator. Residue inside the so-called Queen's Chamber contains traces of zinc and hydrochloric acid, chemicals which, if combined, could have produced hydrogen gas. Some researchers believe the pyramid may have once thrummed with a resonance we no longer understand, a machine cloaked in stone, designed not for the dead but for the living. Other monuments seem to whisper the same possibility. In Egypt's Dendera temple, reliefs show what appear to be bulb-shaped objects connected by cords. Conventional interpretation says they are lotus flowers and serpents, but to modern eyes they resemble electrical lamps. Were these depictions metaphors or memories of a lost science? Cross the seas to South America. At Pumapunku in Bolivia, some of the andesite blocks ring like bells when struck, their tones clear and metallic. Could the builders have shaped them deliberately to vibrate at specific frequencies? Temples on Malta's islands contain chambers where sound amplifies into haunting echoes capable of producing altered states of consciousness. In Chavín de Huántar, Peru, narrow galleries and hidden ducts create roaring effects when water flows through them, transforming the temple into a living soundscape. These were not accidents. They suggest a deep awareness of acoustics and resonance. Myths seem to confirm what stones imply. Legends speak of gods who moved megaliths with their voices, who sang mountains into place, who used chants to raise temples. Tibetan monks today demonstrate that sound can make grains of sand dance into patterns, that vibrations can shift small objects. If scaled upward with knowledge we no longer possess, such principles might explain how ancient builders manipulated blocks too heavy for any primitive technology. Then there are the alignments. Many ancient monuments fall along straight lines that stretch across continents, known as ley lines. From Stonehenge to the pyramids, to Angkor Wat, these alignments suggest that builders mapped more than the land. They mapped the energy of the earth itself. Modern studies show that some megaliths are placed above natural faults and aquifers where telluric currents pulse through stone. Could the ancients have sensed this, tuning their monuments like instruments placed on the strings of the planet? The implications are staggering. If the flood was civilization's first reset, then energy and resonance may have been among the technologies lost. Survivors, unable to preserve the machines themselves, left behind fragments of the knowledge encoded in myths and symbols. What we now call temples may have once been power stations, healing chambers, or instruments designed to harmonize human life with the earth. The flood erased their manuals, but the monuments remain, mute blueprints in stone. Picture the Great Pyramid not as a tomb, but as a humming engine, its chambers vibrating with sound, its walls glowing faintly as energy flowed through it. Imagine priests not as mourners, but as technicians, tending to a machine that gathered and radiated the life force of the earth. Such images border on science fiction, yet the stones themselves refuse to fit neatly into the orthodox script. How does this connect to our journey? The hypothesis of forgotten technology adds depth to the idea of reset. A flood may wash away cities and erase languages, but a technology based on natural forces would be harder to replicate once forgotten. Modern civilization depends on fragile systems of wires, circuits, and fuels. Remove them, and within decades, much of our knowledge would vanish. Perhaps the same happened long ago. Survivors remembered fragments, the resonance of a temple, the glow of a lamp, but not the full design. Those fragments became myths of gods and miracles. And so we stand in front of these ancient monuments and feel an unease. Perhaps we are not looking at beginnings, but ruins of endings. Perhaps we are staring at devices turned into relics, technologies turned into temples. The question now becomes irresistible. If the Great Pyramid was a machine, what was it built to do? Was it truly a power plant, lighting a forgotten age? Was it a transmitter, broadcasting resonance into the skies? Or was it something stranger still, a bridge between worlds now lost? Night falls over the desert of Egypt, and the stars emerge like jeweled fires above the horizon. To the casual eye, they are scattered, countless, eternal. But to the ancients, they were not scattered at all. They were patterns, maps, messages. And the monuments they built mirrored those constellations on the ground, stitching earth to sky. The three Great Pyramids of Giza align with uncanny precision to Orion's belt. Their angles shifted just enough to match the stars as they appeared over 10,000 years ago. Was this coincidence or memory? The ancient Egyptians revered Osiris, god of rebirth, linked with Orion. To align pyramids with those stars may have been more than devotion. It may have been a way to preserve a cosmic map, a bridge across resets of civilization. This pattern repeats worldwide. At Teotihuacan in Mexico, the Pyramid of the Sun and Pyramid of the Moon echo celestial alignments, tracking solstices and planetary cycles. The Maya, master astronomers, built Chichen Itza so that on the equinox, a serpent of shadow slithers down its staircase, merging heaven and earth. In Cambodia, Angkor Wat mirrors the constellation Draco, its towers placed like stars. Across the Andes, the Inca oriented solar temples to catch the first light of solstices, ensuring their rituals echoed cosmic rhythms. How did civilizations separated by oceans all build with such celestial fidelity? One answer: they inherited a sky map from a world before the flood. If survivors carried anything with them, it may have been knowledge of the heavens, for stars remain when everything else is erased. To navigate, to time planting and harvest, to anchor rituals, such knowledge is indispensable. But the precision suggests more than survival. It suggests legacy. Consider also the sudden sophistication of ancient calendars. The Mayan long count spans thousands of years, as if charting cycles far older than their own culture. The Sumerians recorded the precession of the equinoxes, a cycle lasting nearly 26,000 years, difficult to observe without long-term continuity. How could they know such spans unless they were inheriting records from an earlier age? This is where the flooder's reset becomes tangible. When land is drowned, when cities are washed away, the sky remains unchanged. The survivors, bereft of libraries and temples, look upward. There, in Orion and Sirius, in Pleiades and Draco, they still find continuity. The heavens become their archive, a memory not of myth alone, but of measurement. Yet the sky map is not merely observational. Many myths describe the stars as teachers, beings, or even ancestors. The Dogon of Mali knew of Sirius B, a star invisible to the naked eye, long before modern telescopes confirmed it. The Sumerians listed planets unseen until recent centuries. Did they guess, or did they recall knowledge preserved from the world before? If the Great Flood was civilization's first reset, then the stars became the bridge across it. They guided survivors into the New Age, embedding in monuments the memory of cycles too vast to record otherwise. But cycles do not end with stars alone. Cultures across the world whisper that resets themselves are cyclical, that the flood was not unique, but part of a repeating pattern of destruction and rebirth. Across cultures, the idea repeats like a drumbeat. Time is not a straight line but a circle. Civilizations rise, flourish, collapse, and rise again, each cycle ending in cataclysm. The Great Flood, in this view, was not an anomaly, but the first remembered reset in a rhythm older than writing itself. In India, the doctrine of the Yugas divides cosmic history into vast ages. Satya Yuga, the Golden Age, declines into darker epochs until Kali Yuga, the age of conflict and decay, resets the cycle. Each turn ends with destruction, fire, flood, or upheaval, before renewal begins. In Greece, Hesiod spoke of ages of man: gold, silver, bronze, and iron. Each age decayed from the last, each ended in disaster. The Hopi of North America tell of worlds destroyed by fire, ice, and flood, each reset clearing the stage for humanity to begin again. What if these are not allegories but memories? If the Great Flood was one reset, then myth suggests there were others before it, and others yet to come. Archaeology hints at discontinuity, unexplained gaps in settlement layers, sudden disappearances of cultures, unexplained starts and stops in technological development. The so-called Neolithic Revolution may not have been humanity's first, but the first after the slate was wiped clean. Geology, too, speaks in cycles. Ice ages advance and retreat in rhythm. Cosmic impacts, like the one hypothesized in the Younger Dryas, recur on celestial timescales. Volcanic super-eruptions, solar storms, even magnetic pole reversals, all operate in patterns measured not in centuries but millennia. To ancient eyes, each disaster would appear as final. To us, they may be part of an ongoing cadence of resets. This perspective reframes the Great Flood. It was not merely a singular catastrophe, but the first chapter of a recurring cycle, a template for erasure and renewal. Civilizations before may have risen to great heights only to fall, their traces washed away, leaving myths and megaliths as their only testimony. Civilizations after may face the same fate, their achievements buried under water, fire, or silence. How does this help us see the flood as the first reset? It positions it not as an isolated anomaly, but as the beginning of recorded memory of the cycle. Myths of fire before water, of giants before men, of golden ages before floods. They all point to civilizations rising and falling, with the flood as the first preserved scar in the collective consciousness. If cycles are real, then we stand inside one now. The signs, climate shifts, rising seas, restless geology, echo ancient warnings. Yet myth insists there is hope. After each destruction comes renewal. Survivors carry seeds, stories, and symbols into the next world, and perhaps that is the lesson. Not to escape the cycle, but to prepare for the threshold. Which leads us to the final step in our journey, the edge of memory where past, present, and future converge. For if the flood was the first reset, what happens when the cycle turns again? Dawn breaks over a silent plain. The light spills across fields where no monuments stand, yet beneath the soil lie the whispers of civilizations long forgotten. We have followed their traces, flood myths that echo across continents, stones too heavy to explain, alignments with stars, stories of gods and giants. Each fragment points to a truth we can sense but never fully grasp. The Great Flood was not only the end of an age, but the beginning of memory itself. Civilization's first reset. What was lost may be greater than what survived. Libraries dissolved in silt, cities swallowed by oceans, technologies reduced to myth. And yet, survivors carried forward fragments, seeds in a boat, symbols carved in stone, star maps etched into monuments. These remnants became the foundation of everything we call history. We do not stand at the dawn of humanity, but on the ruins of an older chapter. Archaeology continues to uncover hints. LiDAR scans in the Amazon reveal vast city networks hidden beneath jungle canopies, suggesting sophistication before conquest. DNA studies reveal ghost populations woven into our ancestry, peoples we cannot name, yet whose blood still runs in us. Sites like Göbekli Tepe, deliberately buried, or Dwarka, drowned beneath the sea, remind us that history hides as much as it reveals. Each discovery is a crack in the silence, a reminder that the flood never erased everything. But the cycle has not ended. Myths warned that resets repeat. Fire before water, water before silence. The earth shifts, climates change, stars drift in their slow procession. What was once becomes what will be again. We may not be the first civilization, and we may not be the last. The true question is not whether the flood happened, it is whether we are prepared for the next reset when it comes. Still, there is hope in remembering. The ancients left us blueprints, not only in stone but in principle. They aligned with the heavens, tuned their monuments to the earth's rhythms, preserved wisdom in myth and ritual. If we can learn to read those legacies, perhaps we can avoid repeating their downfall. The flood erased much, but it did not erase everything. And so we return to the threshold where we began, the image of waters rising, erasing, resetting. But now we see it differently. The flood was not only destruction, but preservation, a dividing line that ensured fragments of the old survived into the new. It was an ending, yes, but also the first beginning, the moment humanity started to remember. Where are you listening from tonight, and at what time? I love to imagine the map of watchers glowing around the world, each of us sharing in this rediscovery. If these journeys stir your curiosity, consider subscribing to join the search. For the flood was not just yesterday's story, it may be tomorrow's as well.